episode 2, I guess, of this dev stream in which I'm trying to assemble a side scroller level editor. Uh, Last time I worked on this was last time I streamed, so we don't really have anything new to report on the in the meantime. The place where we left off last week was basically right here. We have our list of packs over here, what I'm calling side packs, in other words, groups of sizable resources here. We have our pop over here, which currently open and closes with this temporary button here. Nothing in the background, nothing up here. So, before we really get into it, let's actually talk a little bit about data architecture. So, eventually we're going to be putting a drop down up here that lets you select a level. Eventually we're also going to have an export button that lets you, remember this is meant to be used from an iPad or something similar. I'll probably come up with a PC version at some point as well that has the ability to sync directly with a folder that's like in Dropbox or something like that. But for now, we're going to have the level selector up here. We're eventually going to have a project selector as well. So if you're working on, for instance, 2 different games, you can switch back and forth between the 2 of them. Right now, it just assumes you're only working on the one. We're going to have the packs here, which are for specific resources, and then here is the contents of each pack, which is the individual images and entities that go into that pack. So kind of the way it'll work is you'll have your level selector here, so you can pick a level, then you pick one of these as sort of a palette. You can choose items to place into the level. I'm more or less working what I'm calling 0.1 of this editor, which is the ability to take a couple of assets and create a very blocky spaceship out of them. So let's actually take a look at what those assets are going to look like. Okay, so we got 1 right there. And then let me export these other 2. I actually got a couple other ones to work with here. So we got this 4. So part of the reason that I'm setting this up to be native on the iPad is that it significantly reduces the workflow, because otherwise, without a sort of file management system built in, what you end up doing is you end up having all the assets included within the file structure of the build itself. Which if you're on Windows, you can just sort of copy directly into the file structure in question, which you sort of can do with Mac as well. But it basically means working here on my iPad, exporting images here, importing them in, and sort of custom writing all this in the background, which is actually not a bad solution, especially for something small. If you're just prototyping something small, then the amount you save by not doing all this extra automation work that I'm doing, you make up for in time to create your prototype. But if you're working on a really big project, my thought as well being a project that I intend to do a lot of the level work, like when I'm laying in bed or out at a coffee shop, if coffee shops ever open up again. That way I don't have to do this back and forth between the place I make the art and the place that I work on the levels. I can actually just do all of that right here on my same tablet, wherever I am. So let's get a couple examples. So for the record, the software I'm using to do the pixel art is called Pixaki, which is a pixel art studio on the iPad. I've been enjoying it quite a bit so far. If anybody has any better solutions, feel free to leave it in a comment or something. All right. So here we go. So a bit hard to see. So I'm going to see if I can open these up in preview. Still a little hard to see, but that's fine. So we got a nice ladder there. We have a corner of a hall. We have an actual hall, straight piece. Between those two pieces, I should be able to do. I can't do any cross sections, but I can do any kind of shape I want to. You've got a floor, which is thinner and only meant for horizontal setups, and then you have this sort of textured background, which is a sort of aside whenever you're working with this kind of stuff. You can go to let's see, something like image time tester. So let's see if this works. Usually for a lot of these simple dev requirements, there's something like this where somebody will come up with something and put it into a browser somewhere. So, boom, there you go. It's a little bit difficult to see, but you've got that tiled background right there. Zoom in. Yeah, so it looks pretty good. So I don't think I'm going to actually be working with any of this stuff directly right here, but I might end up creating some test data. One of the other things to consider when you're developing anything is sometimes it's very easy to work in a dev environment that's very similar to your web environment, to your production environment. Web design is a really good example of that because either way, you're testing in a browser just like you'll be eventually using the website. But for something like an iPad, creating an iPad build is actually quite a lengthy process, especially with Unity, because you first have to export the Unity project into Xcode, which is the IDE that Apple uses to do iOS and Mac projects, and then you have to build it from there. You also have to do a bunch of other busy work like setting up device IDs and things like that to ensure you can test. So for a thing like this, where your deployment target is different than the development environment, which in this case is Unity, it's useful to create some little dev shortcuts that allow you to simulate the functionality you'll put on the iPad. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. But for now, I think where we're at is we actually want to start linking up some data. So we're just going to, first of all, we're just going to leave this image, this little cabin image as it is. We're not going to deal with the images at all. We're going to create the ability to add new side packs, possibly delete side packs as well. And get rid of this, and we're going to make it so if you click on a side pack, it opens up this thing here. Then if we have time, we'll also create a add button, which will allow us to create new ones as well. So the requirements we need for that, the first most obvious one is we need something that allows us to capture a piece of text. So we're going to look into that a little bit. So okay, here we go. So, first things first, open our canvas over here. P.S. This grid over here, this is grid tile map. That's where the actual level itself is eventually going to go, but we're not going to worry about that too much right now. also would like to okay, one other thing I'm going to do is I'm temporarily going to put another panel in the background here. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Because I want to be able to see exactly the size of this canvas at all times. And as you may have noticed, it tends to get lost as soon as it gets deselected. So we're going to do that. We'll put the background to, let's say this. Green. Yeah, let's go like that. Yeah. So that's our canvas size for now, which we can work with. All right. So the first thing we want to do is over here. Got our button. We're going to open up Writer. As I mentioned in the last sort of episode of this, I've got Writer is the IntelliJ IDE that I use for Unity, but VS Code is a pretty equal, is a pretty equally good solution. Also, hi Joel, I saw you see you in the chat there. Okay. Okay. So, got the pack list component here, and as you can see, okay. So, the pack list controller is the script that I have sitting on the list here, which is basically the thing that takes the list of packs that we've got set up here and then just turns them into buttons. So there's a few things that we got to do here. This is one of the issues that you run into a lot with any kind of programming, which is also true here in game programming, is this issue of like hierarchical information flow. So right now I've got my model manager here, which knows which packs exist, which then passes that information to the pack list controller, which is attached to this list view over here, which tells it which buttons to make. So the problem is when we click one of those buttons, or when we click the add button that I'm about to make, we want that information to return back out to the manager so the manager knows what to do with it. Because the manager in this case is kind of the hub for everything. So usually the pattern you would use for that is called a callback, which I don't know how to do in Unity, so that's one of the things I'm going to figure out. But first, let's just make the button. So here's what we're going to do. So right now, when you run this thing, this is what you see. So it's grabbing the prefab, so that button prefab, that's the side pack button that was in there already. If I change that one, it would change the look of the other ones. It's creating each of these based on the side packs. What I want to do is just put one more down here with a plus button. So let's do that. And maybe some other time I'd even make that specific button look different. So add side pack button. You'll notice here that I have a lot of code comments in here. I think it's often, especially when you're learning, it's very good practice to add comments describing exactly what you're doing. Once you really know what you're doing, it's not nearly as important. For a lot of my professional work, I end up having a very lean code base with not that many comments. But when you're learning how to do something, it's actually very important to add these because it'll help you. It'll help you debugging it, and actually describing what you're going to do weirdly helps you learn how to do it and plan to do it. It helps you think through the process of doing it. So I'm going to say add side pack button. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say add side pack button. Instantiate is the way that you actually create a copy of something. That copy can be anything, but in this case, it's the button prefab you've got right here. So I'm going to say instantiate button prefab transform. You'll notice that you don't know where this transform here comes from, but that comes from, this transform is actually the it's a whenever you see something like this just floating out in the middle of nowhere, another way you can think about that if you're a JavaScript person is you can say this dot transform. Now with Unity, the linting, at least with linting, is just by the way, it's an algorithm that goes through your code and makes sure you don't have anything useless. So you can see here in Writer it says qualify this dot is redundant. That's because in C#, the this is assumed, so you don't actually need to include it. However, it's still basically there. It means that this object, in this case the game object attached to the packlist controller, is transform, which is the XYZ coordinates that define this sort of the heart of the object. So what we're doing here is we're doing instantiate. We're saying we're instantiating a copy of this button prefab, and then the second argument is the parent. So in other words, we're saying we're creating a new copy of this prefab that we're setting in the inspector. And then we're saying that the parent is this current object, which in this case is the list. So what we're doing is we're creating a new button. We're sticking it into the child hierarchy of this list object over here. You can see here I've linked the side pack button to this button that I set up here. If I change that button, it would change all of the ones that get instantiated in code. So we do that, which adds the thing. We grab the button component, which is a script that came with a modern UI pack. Side pack, let's see. We can't actually reuse this because we used it right up here. So we're going to say side pack button component, add side pack button dot get component. We're going to say clarify that it should be this script, which is the modern UI script. You can actually see that up here. We're using the Michsky UI modern UI pack namespace, which includes this button manager script, which is how the reason we don't have to add anything else to that. And then we're going to say side pack button component button text equals, let's just go like that. So now when we run the game, you can actually see you got that plus button right there. So that's how we're going to add a new one. Actually, I kind of do want to change how that looks. So we have two options. One is which we could actually create a prefab there. I kind of like that idea better. I like to keep my visual design as visible as possible. I'm also not a huge fan of the way that it shows these. I'd rather have more text. Layout, two-column layout. Well, okay, that kind of works. Be a little too much. That works. Okay, so what I've done here is I've rearranged my view. So I've got the console visible at all times, which I actually kind of like. I've got my project window here as a simple tree, which I also kind of like. And then up here I still have my inspector. So now I'm going to take this side back button, side back cell, etc. I'm going to actually copy this one, rename that to main side pack button prefab. Copy that. I'm going to say add pack prefab. Let's just go ahead and modify it a bit. Resources, settings, button text. Oh, we don't have to do as much there. There's an option, I believe. Normal. There we go. So that's the color of the button. So we're going to change to a sort of cool gray. Like so. And we want to be, there we go, like that. And then the text, let's actually grab the hex value of that color, which is 808080. And the text, pick, copy that in. And then what do we got here? Now what I should have probably just done is just use one of their other ones. Actually, I might just do that because that'll be useful in some way. So we're going to delete that one. I'm going to say here, add modern UI pack button. Let's go with gradient gray. That's kind of cool, right? Nope. I still want the outline. So here, modern UI pack button, rounded outline gradient gray. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to say that one. Let's just spell it out. Yeah, let's use the plus. Okay. Hopefully the gradient will also make it show up against multiple things, but if it looks too weird, we can always change it later. Okay, so we've now done that. Let's actually go ahead and change that to add pack prefab main item pack prefab. There we go. I always like to standardize my naming wherever possible because you name things not for the person you are right now, but for the person you will be in 3 weeks when you come back and look at this again and you don't remember at all what you were doing. So we're going to drag that from the item hierarchy up here on the upper left down to the prefabs folder that I made down here. We have add pack prefab. I'm going to change that name as well to item pack prefab. And then we're going to do one more thing, which is we're going to go back to the code. We're going to say public game object add button prefab, just like that. And then on the add side pack button, we're just going to instantiate add button prefab. Take this whole thing out because we're setting the text in the prefab itself now. So this literally just, we actually don't even have to persist that. So we're saying instantiate add button prefab. Nah, we are going to persist that because we're going to link it to something in a second here. Okay. So we did that. We're going to say add pack prefab, which is great. Now we just have to take this list thing and we have to, you see that the name automatically updated here with item pack prefab. We're going to add the add pack prefab that we just made. And I think we should be good. Let's see here. Yeah. Oh, that's not what we wanted. missing something? Mysterious. Okay, let me actually just try. I'm just going to add the original button and we'll see if that does anything different. So, button, rounded outline, let's say gray. I'm just going to say button text plus. Copy that text, delete that guy. Put that there. Get rid of this one. And back prefab. So we replace the prefab with that one. I'll try it again. Now it's just not there. Oh, I see why. It's because we deleted it. Okay, so let's select that view again. Let us just drag the add pack prefab from over there into that slot. Hit play. There it is. All right. So that should give us a new one, which I think should be good. All right, so now we have our list, and our list actually works pretty well. The only thing we need to do is create a callback to let the parent manager know that we clicked something. So you can see right here, packcontroller.set. Let's add some comments here. Button list on the left. That. Okay, so packcontroller.set actually does that. And then what we're going to do is just Google how to do a callback in C#. As I'm saying C# instead of Unity because callbacks, how to do a callback is a code question, which is about C#, the language that Unity uses, rather than something specific in Unity. But maybe there's something specific that we'll run into, in which case we actually look at how to do a callback in Unity. But let's see here. So you can see here, public delegate void task completed callback string task result. Okay. Okay, so this is something called fat arrow notation, which is an equals followed by a greater than sign. That's in JavaScript how you would do a function declaration, because every callback is a function. I do not know if that makes sense to do in C#. Let's just find out, shall we? Okay, so model manager. We're going to say so this one we're going to say set does this, does the thing. We're going to say Okay, so it looks like we actually have to declare a callback using something called a delegate, which is a certain kind of. It's basically describing. A delegate is like something that describes informational format for a kind of function that is what we think of as a callback. So in this case, the example on the Microsoft documentation here is it is a Boolean callback. In other words, it returns true or false. That takes two arguments, which are both integers with these names. So on Model Manager, no, we're going to declare it here. Deciding where to declare things is a little bit of an art. I think it depends a little bit on your gut feeling. I like to try to keep things as centralized as possible to the specific function. So this kind of callback here is one that we're going to use specifically for a side pack, which is, let's decide right now what that's going to look like. So we're going to say public delegate void, because it's just going to do something. Pack, side pack, callback. We're going to say side pack, selected pack. Okay. Now here's what we're going to do here. We're going to assume that if that's null, then what we're trying to do is we're creating a new side pack. Yes. I think that's right. Okay. So here we're going to say side pack callback. So we're going to create a private thing to store that in. The underscore beforehand means that it's a private local case. I'm just going to double check that that's true in Unity. Yeah. It's very easy to say it's. We're gonna say that these underscore variables are private like that. Okay, so underscore callback is how we're gonna save this. So I'm gonna say save the callback. That. So now persisting the callback. Now we just have to figure out how to link it up to the clicks. So let's actually figure that out right now. I'm searching on click in Unity because on click is a method of a Unity UI thing. It's part of the Unity library. It's not an inherent part of the C# language. So on click on button from code. What's that mean? Event trigger. Okay, so the button component should actually have it. Let's find out if that's true. So you'll notice that it has click event as an option, which I'm wondering, yes. let's look at what this button actually makes up a little bit. So the on-click event here, which is part of the button manager script. It's just a normal delegate. I think that should be all we need to do. Let's see if the hover event looks like the same. Yes. Okay. So let's see if this works. Okay. Okay, now we're back in Model Manager. We're going to say side pack. Let's find out if this worked, and then if it does, I'll explain what happened. Clicked on spaceship, clicked on station, clicked on cantina. Perfect. Okay. So, here's what basically happened. Because we created this delegate here, which defines the kind of interaction we're going to have. It basically defines a kind of function that we're going to use to pass information back from this child back to the parent, the model manager. Side pack callback. So we're using that here. We're saying that the parent, when they call set, has to provide a callback here. Persisting that here, we're doing, I'm not 100% sure we actually have to do this in Unity. Let's actually just find out what happens if we don't. Will it still work? Sure does. Okay, so we don't even have to persist it locally, which is kind of nice. Alright, so Model Manager, which is the data parent, it's the authoritative source of data. One of the main rules in programming that a lot of beginners get wrong is that there is a rule called the single source of information. In other words, any piece of information has a single owner, whether that's a specific object or anything else. So everything else can either tell the owner to set the information or ask the owner to give them the information. But the home of that information never exists in two places at once. You never copy information or duplicate it. You always just have one place that it lives, and everybody else either pushes in an update or pulls out a request. So in this case, Model Manager is the thing that's going to own everything, and specifically in this case, pack list is the single source of information for the list of packs, which means that we tell the controller, which is the thing that controls this list of buttons here, to set its buttons using this pack list, and we send this delegate side pack. And what that delegate does is basically allows it to provide a little function here which says, okay, so we're going to provide a function for what happens when somebody clicks on one of those things. And when they click on it, it's going to send us back the specific pack that they selected, which means everything we do to actually modify this list happens here in the owner of the information, the authoritative owner of the information. Okay, so we're sending this callback here, receiving the callback here as the second argument in the set function. We're creating the button. on the button, we're taking the click event, which is the part of the button script that controls clicks, adding a listener, which is a way of saying adding a function that gets called whenever this event happens, in this case a mouse click. I think hopefully it'll also work for touches, but we'll find that out later. I'm saying this is a delegate because that's the thing you have to do in C# apparently. And then we're saying, okay, in the button click of this, we're calling this callback to and sending the specific pack that was used to create this button. All right? So that's pretty cool. It's actually complicated enough that I am going to make a gist. So once again, as I mentioned in the last episode, this is leptin. And in leptin, you basically just a way for you to put pieces of code, whatever you want to. Whenever I learn how to do something new, I put it in here. Using delegates for callbacks in C#. .md means markdown. Secret because I don't want my notes publicly browsable. And we're going to say define let's actually go ahead and make this a little more verbose. It's always better to spend the extra time up front really getting something down rather than rushing it, half understanding it, and then having to redo it all months later. Let's just say. Okay. All right. Now I have this exact, well, let's actually change that slightly just because I'm anal about these things. There we go. So now we have this simple little thing where if I want, like, oh yeah, how do I do a callback in C#? I just do callbacks, C#. There it is. I know how to define it. I know how to call it from the child. I know how to define it in the parent. The one other thing I'm going to put in this list is add on click in Unity. MD again. Oh, let's actually just say CS because it's just a simple script. And there we go. Simple as that. Let's make pretty verbose titles so that it's really searchable. So that way if I want to do button on click, there you go. It's right there. So all of this is now accessible to me to use in the future whenever I want to. Okay. Now, anyway, we have our list of buttons. We actually just want to add one to that as well. Just want to say component equals add sidepack button dot get component button manager, just like we did up there. I'm going to say add sideback component dot click event dot add listener delegate there, just like we did up there, and we're going to say callback null. And what that means is that when you click the add button, oh, it doesn't like this. No, it's fine. When you click the add button, it should return null. So let's see if that works as well. Yeah, well, that causes a bug because of how we wrote our debug line, but that does mean it's working. Okay, so we now have a working callback, and so now we kind of have to decide what to do. So I'm not too concerned with what happens if you opened the pack right now. So I'm just going to go like this. If pack I'll leave it at that. Now one of the things you'll actually notice here is when I created that, it automatically defaulted. I also need to be out of play mode. So it automatically defaulted having the curly brace down there, which is not really what I like. So whatever your code map is, I've discovered with this kind of thing, like actual code formatting and things like that. Code style in this case, C#. I have noticed that this is not something I ever cared about when I was a junior programmer, but the more I do it now, the more I like to actually have a really consistent code style, because I think the more consistent your code style, the more readable it is, which translates to literal hours, sometimes tens or even hundreds of hours on a big enough project of save time, especially if you start coding with other people, if you start working in a team. Having a really consistent coding style is incredibly important. Okay, so that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Line. Here we go. So other, you can see here, I should have set this to end of line, just like that. Save. Now, say if true, and voila. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna say if pack is not equal to null, we're just gonna print it to the console. We're not gonna do anything with that right now. Otherwise, that's not really what I wanted either. Hold on. I usually like to have my else on the same bracket. However, I'm honestly not used to having this intense of a code formatting setup, but I think I might be fine with it. Here we go. Okay. Don't want to use those too much. Kind of like these on their own lines as well. Okay. Alright, so I have it set up like that, which is generally how I do things in JavaScript. I don't know if it's the normal standard in Unity or C#, but this is how I usually do it, so I'm sticking to it. So, if pack is null, then we are creating a new one. Okay, so now what we have to do is figure out a way to get a string, because what we're gonna do, let's go like this. Let's do this first of all. Let's go. Var new pack equals new side pack. New pack like that. I'm gonna say pack list dot push. Okay, here's another question. How to add an item. Okay, so what this is basically saying is we can set the number directly, or we can use a list object, our list objects, performant and unity. So C#, I think, originated as a way of using like .NET and things like that, which is another web programming interface that, in my experience, isn't super common anymore, but used to be a bigger deal in like the early 2000s. Unity as a game platform means that performance is a lot more important, which means that some things that work really well on the web side of things don't make as much sense. So use lists if you're changing the size of the array. If there are a fixed number of elements, use arrays. So that makes sense. So if you're fixing the classic case of having a fixed number of elements would be like if you had a 16 by 16 grid with different kinds of things, and you'd use a two-dimensional array with 16 each way. But we're going to be using by definition, this list of packs is going to be changing depending on whether we add or remove those. So let's go like this, list side pack, like that, equals new list. God damn it, I don't know what just happened. Is that gonna work? I don't really know. Bizarre. Works fine. Okay. Like that. Blobbity blobbity. Acha. Okay. Now, I think, say add pack. Here's the issue. Okay, so as you can see, we've got some interesting things here. Let's say pack controller set. Let's say here. Let's find out if things still work. They appear to. Okay. Now, something you're going to notice is, even though I've linked up this callback here, it still doesn't actually do anything when I click the add button. So let's just ensure that everything's working as possible. So we're going to say debug.log pack list dot length count. This is C# count, I guess, is the number of objects in the array. So let's see if we're actually adding lists, because I suspect that we are. Okay. Boom. So that 4 means that there's 1, 2, 3, 1 extra. 5, 6, 7. So we're clearly adding items here, however, they're not showing up. And the reason they're not showing up is because right here, pack controller.set is the thing that builds the list of buttons. It doesn't directly correspond to the number of packs I've got over there. And this only happens once when this model manager component is initialized. So this is what we're going to do. What we want to do is we're going to refresh the list of buttons every single time we change what's in there. So I'm going to create a new method, refresh the pack controller. And there, we're going to say this. Now, this might look a little circular because, as you can see, it looks like refresh packs is calling itself, which in most code would lead to an unbroken loop. It would just spiral out of control for forever, basically. But the difference here is that this refresh packs is happening inside of a callback, which means it doesn't spiral endlessly because it just sets it up so that if I click a button, it calls this once and then sets it up again. So let's see if that's actually, I suspect that'll work, but let's find out. Bunk, 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 bunk. Pretty much add as many of these as I feel like. Alright, cool. Alright. So the next thing I want to do is actually somehow pop up a box that asks me for the text that's supposed to go in here. I'm actually gonna hide this. That's honestly probably something to tackle next time. So, deal with that. New pack. So that the clicking is automatically working. So the next thing I want to happen is when I hit this plus button, I want a dialog box to pop up here, into which I can insert some text that'll get saved as the name of the new side pack. That's pretty much it. Join me next time. Follow whatever the thing that people say. Follow this channel on YouTube once it goes on YouTube. Talk to you later.